Under the dazzling lights, amid the melodies that make millions of people shed tears, there is one truth few are willing to confront. Not every legend was raised in love. The legend, who sold over 300 million records, achieved dozens of major awards, even received the prestigious Knight title, the one standing on stage with tens of thousands of cheering fans, is one of the most heartbreaking fates. From a child abandoned right in his own family, to the brightest pop music star of the century, and then falling into the abyss of addiction, despair, nearly losing his life many times. Elton has overcome all of that with faith and a desire to live more than anyone else, but life continues to challenge him again. At age 78, Elton John's life is more pitiful than ever. Every day he has to fight with wounds that never heal. And before stepping deep into his journey full of pain, if Elton John's music has ever warmed you in the days that seemed like collapsing, please leave a heart, like a whispered thank you sent to the man who used his own melodies to hold us back to life. Imagine a young boy who had just come into the world in a peaceful suburban area located on the outskirts of London, but who failed to receive the single most precious and invaluable thing that life has to offer: the boundless and unconditional love coming from his parents. That very boy is none other than Reginald Kenneth Dwight, the individual who would later become known to the entire world under the name Elton John, recognized as one of the greatest and most influential artists of all time. Reginald was born on the date of the 25th of March, 1947, in the location of Pinner, Middlesex, which is now considered part of Greater London, within the family household of Stanley and Sheila Dwight, a place that was filled to the brim with arguments, shouting, and an atmosphere of coldness rather than one of warmth and comfort. Elton's father, Stanley Dwight, served in the Royal Air Force and possessed a strict military background. He was a man who emphasized discipline, and he spent the majority of his time focused on his work rather than on his son. The relationship between Stanley and Reginald was so distant and chilly that many years later, Elton once told a reporter that he could not recall a single instance when his father had embraced him. This statement is not merely a simple memory, it represents a deep and lasting scar embedded within the soul of a child who was desperately yearning for recognition and comfort. Can you possibly picture it? A young boy gazing at his own father without being able to remember the sensation of being held in his arms? Elton later shared that, "I do not remember my father ever hugging me, not even once." This is not an exaggerated remark, but rather the profound pain experienced by a child who was not loved in the manner that every single child requires. This feeling drove him throughout his entire life, like an echo that never fades away, resonating in every piece of music, in every lyric. That sensation of wanting to be loved, of wanting to be accepted. Elton's mother, Sheila Eileen Dwight, although she was present more often, her love was also not the kind that provided safety and gentleness. She had a quick temper, was prone to anger, and frequently scolded the young Reginald for minor mistakes. Many close friends and reporters, when recounting Elton's childhood, all describe an environment that was overflowing with shouts and reprimands rather than with soothing words. A child needs to be comforted, needs an embracing arm when crying. But what Elton received was only criticism, rejection, and a strongly emphasized message. Be good, be as they want you to be, or else just live with your own loneliness. In that house, the arguments between his parents became a way of life. For Elton, that was the sound he always heard from the time he was small until he grew up. But then, right within that room full of chaotic noises, something else began to blossom: music. The story recounts that when he was still very young, only about 3 years old, Reginald was already able to play back a melody that he had just heard on the radio. For many children, that would be a game. For Elton, that was the salvation. Music became the place of refuge. Music never scolded Elton. The piano, those black and white keys, never asked the young boy that, "Why are you not good enough?" It gave him the answer that he had never received before. You have value. When he was just 11 years old, Reginald had already won a scholarship to the Royal Academy of Music, something that thousands of children dreamed of but never managed to achieve. This was the first turning point, marking the rise out of this stifling house to step into a larger world, wider and full of more opportunities. But if you think that this made Elton's family proud, then you are mistaken. Because for those who do not know how to love, no matter how great the success, it cannot make them change. The indifference of the family reflected a profound message. When you do well, then that is taken for granted. But when you fail, that is your fault. Elton grew up with the persistent question, why does love have to be conditional? He learned from an early age that if he did not meet expectations exactly, then love would wither away. That sank in so deeply that when he stood on stage every night in front of tens of thousands of people cheering, he still could not stop feeling a deep emptiness inside his heart. In his own autobiography and in later interviews, Elton repeatedly recounted his childhood like a deeply etched wound, not because of lacking something grand, but because of lacking the most basic thing, the feeling of truly being loved. People often say talent is something you are born with. But for Elton John, music was not just talent, it was the wall shielding against the emotional pain from his early years. It was the place where he hid his anxieties, his fears of being abandoned. And precisely because of that, he poured his entire life into music. If Elton John's childhood was an open wound, then the years stepping into music were like a storm, powerful, intense, and sweeping him away farther than anyone could imagine. In 1967, Elton at that time was still just a young man struggling to find a place in the music industry. He played in bars, joined the band Bluesology, and sent demos to many record companies without any ray of hope. His career at that point was precarious, like his own soul. And then, a letter arrived. A letter from someone he had never met. That was Bernie Taupin, a rural young man who liked writing poetry, who happened to read an advertisement recruiting artists from Liberty Records and sent his lyrics to try his luck. Elton recounted in an interview with Rolling Stone that, "If that day I opened the wrong envelope, perhaps my whole life would have turned in a different direction. Two strangers, no meeting, no prior appointment, but when Elton read the first lines from Bernie, he knew right away. This is the piece he had been searching for all along." They met. Sitting face to face in the small room, Bernie set down the stack of lyrics. Elton flipped through each page, letting emotions flow into melodies. It was a harmony that was almost inexplicable. One person wrote lyrics as if speaking on behalf of Elton's heart. One person wrote music as if breathing life into every word of Bernie's. Not cooperation. That was destiny. And from that meeting, an entire treasure trove of music was born. Only 2 years later, Elton John went from an unknown to a name that all of London had to mention. Your Song was released in 1970. Not just a song, but for Elton John, it was like the moment he stepped out of the shadowy veil and for the first time was seen under the light. The song was written by chance. One morning at the small apartment in London, Bernie placed in front of Elton a page full of very ordinary, very sincere words, not elaborate or flashy. Elton took that page to the piano, sat down, placed his hands on the keys, and in less than 20 minutes, the melody was complete. Elton once recounted in Rolling Stone, "I did not try to write a hit. I just wrote a musical version of myself at that time. Naive, clumsy, and yearning to be loved. Perhaps precisely because of that, when released, Your Song touched millions of hearts. BBC played it over and over continuously." The New Musical Express called Elton the new phenomenon of England, a talent both genuine and brilliant. What is special is that although it is a love song, Your song was written by two people who had never had a complete romantic experience. Bernie, the lyricist, was too young at that time to understand suffering. Elton, the composer, had never felt a love big enough to heal his damaged childhood. It was precisely that clumsiness that created the miracle. A song not perfect, but sincere to the utmost. Rocket Man was born in the moment when Elton began to feel himself being swallowed by fame. The song tells of a lonely astronaut drifting in space, far from family, far from normal life. But in reality, the loneliest person at that time was not the character in the song, but Elton himself. When performing live, Elton once explained that Rocket Man is the feeling when you become famous too quickly, to the point that you yourself no longer recognize who you are. A series of audiences burst into tears because they saw themselves in it. The man working far from family, the woman feeling lost amid a busy life, the young people not finding their own meaning. Rocket Man marked Elton's maturation. No longer naive like your song, but profound, weary, and full of life's essence. In 1973, Elton and Bernie decided to challenge their limits with an album not just big, but gigantic. The result was 31 songs, including those considered immortal. Benny and the Jets, Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting, and especially Goodbye, Yellow Brick Road, referring to the yellow brick road in The Wizard of Oz, symbol of dreams, of glamour. But the song carried an opposite message. Goodbye glamour, goodbye fame. I just want to return to being myself. Behind the most blockbuster album of Elton's career was a heartbreaking truth. He began to exhaust himself, began to fear losing control. But it was precisely that fear that created the masterpiece. To this day, Rolling Stone ranks this album in the list of 500 greatest albums of all time. Candle in the Wind initially was a farewell to Marilyn Monroe, a talented but lonely icon, like the female version of Elton. The lyrics like a message about the price to pay for fame. Your candle burned out long before your legend ever did. But by 1997, when Princess Diana passed away, Elton turned the song into a goodbye the whole world dedicated to England's Rose. This new version became the best-selling single in history, topping charts in 33 countries. And when Elton sang at Diana's funeral, his voice trembled, not because millions were watching, but because he understood the loneliness that Marilyn and Diana endured. The loneliness just like his own. Hit after hit followed, sold-out tours from America to England, from Europe to Australia. There were nights Elton had to perform 3 shows in a row because the audience was too large. But Elton's appeal did not just lie in the music. When he stepped onto the stage with sequin jumpsuits, vibrant fur coats, star-shaped glasses, high heels, feathered hats, and colors that broke every mold, many people mocked. They called it ridiculous. But Elton knew one thing. If no one protects the child inside himself, then he himself will do it. No artist dared to dress like him. No one dared to express themselves like him. No one dared to live truly with such quirkiness, fieriness, and rebellion. From stages in America to England, from Europe to Australia, Elton's shows were always in a sold-out state, even having to add continuous performances. He was not just a singer, songwriter, or performer. Elton John was a cultural phenomenon, an icon of freedom. In 1975, Elton became the first solo artist to have 7 consecutive albums at #1 on Billboard, a rare feat few could touch. He was called King of Pop, the one who changed music in the 70 seconds. But the higher he flew, the more Elton felt lost. Backstage, when everyone left, when the applause had died down, Elton was left only with the mirror, where he saw a man full of insecurity. Fame could not compensate for a family lacking love. Stage lights could not fill the void from the hugs he had never received. In an interview with The Guardian, Elton said, "I am the loneliest person in the world when I step off the stage. A person who has everything, but lacks the most important thing: peace." Audiences only saw Elton's brilliance. They did not see the nights he sat with a glass of wine, feeling like he was nobody. Glory did not free him. It only made him run faster to avoid facing the real pain. Each performance, Elton was like building another layer of armor, another layer of makeup, another layer of cloak, all to shield a heart damaged from childhood. But armor is heavy. Glamour is blinding. And gradually, Elton became exhausted. After those years of brilliant glory, when the stage lights had not yet had time to fade, another shadow, even deeper, had descended upon Elton John. Not a temporary emptiness, but a dark path repeating over and over, submerging him in a vortex of addiction lasting more than a decade, a battle that most of the world had never seen clearly. Drinking alcohol at first was a way for him to fit in, then gradually became something he needed every night, every time he stepped into the backstage. From alcohol, he moved to stronger stimulants: cocaine, sleeping pills, painkillers. In fact, Elton John once admitted he used cocaine to be more confident when facing the stage, something he thought would help him be less shy and insecure, but in the end turned into something that controlled his life. Elton once described his addiction period in a way that was realistic to the point of chilling. "I smoked weed, I drank a bottle of Johnny Walker, then I stayed up for 3 days. After that, slept for a day and a half. Then I woke up and ate nonstop because I was too hungry. Then vomited, then started again." This image is not just a recount. It is a spiritual suicide day by day, repeating in a cycle of nearly 20 years, stretching from the late 1,970 seconds into the 1,980 seconds. The terrifying thing is, he did not describe this in a glamorous way. He described it with real fear. He once said that it was the scariest thing that even he hates looking back on. Not just drugs. Alcohol and cocaine caused Elton to go through seizures almost deadly. He once revealed that there were nights he passed out, stopped breathing, turned pale to the point others had to put him in bed, only to crawl up a few dozen minutes later to continue, as if the shadow of addiction was fixed on his back. There is a fact that surprises many people. Elton once spent years without stepping out of his hotel room or his house. He was in the addiction to the point of isolating from the outside world, not meeting friends, not answering the phone. Only cocaine, alcohol, and chaotic composing remained. In later interviews, Elton also made clear that stimulants played a role, like a mask, hiding his true emotions. At first, cocaine made him feel more confident facing crowds. But when addiction combined with depression, it made him completely detached from reality. But it did not stop at stimulants. Elton John once publicly said that music is sex to me, meaning both of these are ways he sought connection, love, and the feeling of being recognized, things that his lacking childhood had haunted him for a long time. In many phases of his sliding life, he fell into short-lived, impulsive, and mistaken relationships. Not because he truly found love, but because he was trying to fill a deep emotional hole in his heart. It was like a way to tell himself, I still have value, still loved. But those relationships often ended in disappointment, heartbreak, and the feeling of being abandoned. This was not normal desire. This was a desperate effort to compensate for an abandoned childhood. And the saddest thing? Many people, including assistants, close friends, never saw him think about wanting to stop, at least until his life was almost threatened. For Elton, this phase was not just messy years, it was something that reshaped his entire life. It turned an artist who once stood at the top of the world into a human struggling with himself every day, every hour, every minute. And right in those darkest days, Elton realized a horrifying thing. The cloak of fame cannot cover the inner pain. Once, Elton confessed his feelings in that period with a straightforward, poignant sentence that no one forgets. "My life at that time was a nightmare that even I hate looking into." There are people who spend half their lives standing before seas of people, but when returning to their own room, they only hear the sigh of emptiness. For Elton John, that was not just a feeling, that was a curse existing from the day he was a child. He sought love in the way a child lacking warmth seeks the first blanket in life, hastily, desperately, and ready to embrace anything, even if it has thorns. In 1984, Elton John married Renate Blauel, a German sound engineer. It was a marriage that Elton himself later admitted was a decision in chaos. In an interview with The Australian, he said a sentence full of bitterness: "I truly cared for Renate, but I was completely not ready for that marriage. I hurt her and hurt myself." Renate was a good person, kind, gentle, but Elton at that time was not seeking a life partner. He was seeking an escape from himself. He wanted to prove that he was fine, that he could love like others. But inside, Elton then was just a man drowning in alcohol, addictive, drugs, fears, and loneliness. The marriage broke up after only 4 years. And what hurt him most was not the divorce, but the feeling that Elton knew he had just hurt an innocent person, like the way his childhood had once hurt him. That was a cut he carried in his heart for many years. One morning, after a long night immersed in cocaine, sedatives, and alcohol, Elton almost stopped breathing. The people around had to shout to wake him up. Just a few more seconds, a legend would have disappeared. This was the tragic turning point in that legendary life. When nothing outside could save him anymore, it was the collapse of his ego that pushed Elton to the brink of change. That was the slap that made Elton understand that if he did not save himself, then no one else would. And Elton John, the icon, the record breaker, the one with millions of fans, had to do the thing he feared most: go to rehab. Elton once said in an interview with BBC Radio 4 Inches 2012, "Rehab was harder than any stage or tour I have ever experienced." In the treatment center, he was no longer a superstar. He was just Reginald Dwight, a 7-year-old boy with a heart full of scars. He faced what he had run from all his life. And for the first time, Elton learned to say, "I need help." That was the hardest sentence in his life, but also the sentence that saved him from death. And then, love came. In 1993, through a friend, Elton John met David Furnish, a young Canadian director. Two ordinary people, simply sitting down to dinner together in a house in Windsor. But for Elton, that was the first time in his life he felt peaceful. David did not come because of Elton John, the superstar, the legend, the monument. David came because of Elton, the person with a slightly awkward smile, deep eyes, and a heart that had been hurt too much. In an interview on Larry King Live in 2002, Elton emotionally, "David loved me when I had nothing left but chaos. He showed me that I am worthy of being loved." David did not try to change Elton. He just stood by, quietly, patiently, warm like a small sun. And it was precisely that gentleness that filled the void Elton had carried since childhood. In 2005, when the UK allowed civil partnerships, Elton and David officially became a legal couple. In 2014, same-sex marriage was recognized. They held a wedding, not ostentatious, noisy, but full of sincerity. A boy who once grew up in a cold house now could sign the marriage paper with the person he loved. And Elton's life turned to another chapter when 2 children were born through surrogacy. Zachary, born in 2010, and Elijah, born in 2013. In an interview with Rolling Stone in 2016, Elton said, "Family is the most beautiful thing I have ever had." He, the one who once feared dying from loneliness, now has 4 people waiting for him to come home every day. No more drugs. No more alcohol. No more long nights wrestling with darkness. Only a middle-aged man wearing a baseball cap, taking his children to school, smiling gently when watching them run and play in the garden. An ordinary Elton John, but the happiest. Elton's journey to find himself again is not a fairy tale. It is full of blood, tears, rehab, depression, breakups, and breathtaking efforts to rebirth. But precisely because of that, the light at the end of his tunnel is so brilliant. Elton did not just find love. He found the family he had yearned for all his life. He found the peace that fame never brought. He found the best version of himself, and that is why today, people do not just remember Elton John for his music. They remember him for a life that fought to live. But the light did not just save Elton, it also made him want to save others. Elton understood that if there had not been a hand extended at the right time, he would not be alive anymore. And he began to ask himself a very simple question. If I survived and then ignored those like me, what meaning does that life have? That was when Elton established the Elton John AIDS Foundation, one of the world's largest charities on HIV/AIDS, founded in 1992. Elton spent hundreds of millions of USD on projects supporting healthcare, treatment, law, and education, helping millions of people in nearly 40 countries. Many times appearing at fundraising events, he cried when mentioning those who had passed away. He said in a speech at the International AIDS Conference, 2012, "If I had known how to love myself sooner, perhaps I could have saved more people. But I will do everything in the rest of my life to make up for it." Elton did not just save those with the disease. He saved those who are desperate, those who dare not speak up, those like him when young, lost, hurt, and thinking no one needs them. And then, in the final years of life, Elton realized the truth that took him more than half a century to recognize. Love does not come from the stage or millions of fans. It comes from what we leave for the world. The people he helped, whether a child in South Africa, a gay youth discriminated against in Latin America, or a woman unable to access medicine in Eastern Europe, all carry a part of Elton John's light. Their lives so brilliant that everyone thinks they are immortal. But time always has a way to pull every light down to its truest brightness. And with Elton John, the one who once made the world explode with music, style, and rebellion, old age came not gently like the piano pieces he once played. It came like an unavoidable bill. The man who once stood before hundreds of thousands of fans, dancing for hours without tiring, now has to rely on a cane, painkillers, and the patience of doctors. Starting from the period of 2017, Elton John encountered a major health shock. He contracted a rare bacteria after a South American tour, to the point doctors had to say straight, if delayed a few hours, he would have died. Elton recounted in The Guardian 2019 that it was the moment he felt death very clearly right at his bedside. From that day, Elton's body entered a chain of collapses. Broken hip, ruined knees, damaged nerves, numb legs, back pain. Each step is an effort. Each time standing up is a battle. But Elton John still continued performing. He still wanted to sing, still wanted to sit in front of the piano and let music overshadow every pain. There were nights doctors had to inject painkillers right before the show. There were times Elton had to sit in a chair throughout the concert because he could not stand. And there were moments he stepped onto the stage only with trembling legs, but his gaze still bright, like a promise. I am still here. I have not abandoned you. On the 16th of February 2020 in New Zealand, one of the most heartbreaking moments of Elton's career happened. He was singing when his voice gradually became hoarse, then completely disappeared due to pneumonia. Elton burst into tears right on stage. Tens of thousands of fans stood up applauding, as if wanting to embrace him. The video that day spread across the world. The image of a legend not conquering his own body, but still standing there trying to sing to the last minute. In an interview with CBS Sunday Morning, Elton said that my body is gradually betraying me, but I still sing because that is the only part of me that has never abandoned me. A sentence that makes anyone who hears it fall silent. And then he announced the final tour of his life. Farewell, Yellow Brick Road. What the world thought would be a grand farewell party turned into a painful journey lasting many years. In the documentary Farewell, Yellow Brick Road, Elton recounted that each performance night was a challenge. There was a time he just finished performing and collapsed backstage, legs almost without sensation. Many tour staff had to help him back to the resting room, while Elton only smiled to ease everyone's worry. So why did he still continue? Because music is the only way Elton felt he was truly living. He did not need money, did not need fame, but he needed to say goodbye like an artist, with heart and gratitude for all those who had and are loving him throughout decades. In the podcast Smartless 2022, Elton choked up saying, "I sing because that is what kept me alive while everything else once wanted to kill me." And that was not a flowery statement. That was the truth of a person who had gone through almost every dark side of life. On the 8th of July, 2023 in Stockholm, Elton John officially said goodbye to the live stage. Thousands of people cried. They understood that they were witnessing the end of a legend, a person who had fought too much, too strongly, too persistently to stand there. Elton bowed, smiled, and said, "I am lucky to still be alive to say goodbye." That sentence like a soft knife cutting through many people's hearts. But Elton's tragedy and old age did not just come from the body. In NBC Today Show 2016, Elton said, "I do not want to die when my children are still too young." On the face of the artist who once lived like a wild flame, for the first time, people saw the worry of a father. Death did not scare him, but the loneliness of young children, what he once experienced, haunted him to the core. Now, at age 78, Elton John lives a completely different life. He spends time taking his children to school, watching soccer with David Furnish, cooking, gardening, reading books. Many fans were once shocked when Elton first posted a photo of himself flit. But for him, that is paradise, a place that in 50 crazy years he never had the chance to touch. His body still hurts every day. He still has to take medicine. But Elton accepts it all. In an interview with Rolling Stone 2023, he said, "I have lived more than what I ever dared to dream. If I have to pay the price, I accept." That is the voice of a person who has looked straight into pain and chosen to smile. Elton John, at age 78, is a legend not just because of music, but because he survived through a childhood full of trauma, through years of addiction, through near deaths, and through the loneliness that once pulled him to the bottom. But above all, he has witnessed his children grow up, the small thing but the biggest dream of his entire life. Elton John no longer stands on stage, but his light is still there. In every story, every piece of music, every tear of the listeners, still there. His life is proof that a person can start from trauma, stumble, err, but still can find reason to stand up, to love, to live on. And Elton John has done that more beautifully than anyone. He has a family, 2 children laughing loudly in the house, a husband always ready to hold his hand, and a heart that has learned to forgive itself. He once said in his final career concert, "I am lucky to still be alive to say goodbye." That is a sentence only those who have gone through hell understand. There are those stories that come to an end with the sound of applause. But the story of Elton John comes to an end with the sound of sighs, the sound of bursting into tears behind the curtains, and the sound of a heartbeat slowing down in accordance with the passing years. When looking back at the entire journey of his, from the lonely young boy who was denied even a single hug by his father, to the artist standing in front of tens of thousands of audience members, then the man who stumbled and fell within the darkness of drugs, only to ultimately rediscover himself right within the embracing arms of his family, we then come to understand glamour is never something that comes without a cost. Elton has paid for it through his lost and deprived childhood, through loves that shattered and broke apart, through health that has deteriorated and become ruined, and at times, through even the very desire to continue living. The journey of Elton John resembles something like a galaxy, brilliantly shining, utterly chaotic and disordered, beautiful to such an extent that it cannot be touched or reached, and distant to such a degree that no one knows just how many years of complete darkness lie hidden right behind that light. And when observing him sitting beside his two children, embracing them in a truly slow and deliberate manner, in a way that is different from the father of the past who did not embrace him, we come to understand that Elton John has at last found the thing that he has been searching for. Throughout his entire life, a real and genuine family, a love that carries no conditions, a place where he truly belongs. Perhaps every legend must pay a price, but Elton John has found the greatest victory of his entire life. If you find that this story touches your heart, do not forget, like the video to help the story of Elton John spread even wider. Comment one song by Elton that you love the most, so that we can know which melody you grew up with. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the upcoming journeys about those artists, those people behind the stage lights, those souls who have traded their entire lives to bring music to us. And if you want me to continue making about another legend, please leave the name in the comment section below. Thank you for staying until the end. See you in the next video.